Let yourself drift into this idea. You're standing in front of a mirror. Not just any mirror, but one that reflects not your body, but your soul. You stare, and what you see is not just the outline of your features, but the history of your silences, the weight of your swallowed words, the burn of every yes you said when your entire being screamed no. You see the smile you rehearsed for years, the one that said, "It's okay. I understand," even when it wasn't, even when you didn't. Now imagine this. Someone walks into the room. They interrupt your thoughts. They ask you for something. Again, something inconvenient. Something that costs you peace, sleep, dignity, again, and you feel it, that tug in your chest. The hesitation, the quiet resistance. But before it can become a full thought, your mouth opens and out. It comes, sure, no problem, even when it is a problem, even when it's slowly breaking you, even when a part of you, the truest part, is whispering, "Please, stop doing this to yourself." But you don't, you never do. Why? Why do you keep letting people walk all over you? Why does your voice vanish the moment it's needed? Most, why does your spine soften when it should rise? Why do you trade self-respect for temporary peace over and over again? Here's the cruel paradox. You say yes to be liked, and resent yourself for it. You stay quiet to avoid conflict, and create one inside your own head. You carry everyone else's burdens, and then wonder why your knees buckle under the... Wait, you think you're being kind. You think you're being generous. You think you're avoiding drama, being mature, taking the high road. But deep down, you know something else is happening. You're not being kind. You're being invisible. You're not keeping the peace. You're sacrificing yourself for it. You're not strong. You're exhausted. And still, you do it again and again and again, until eventually you start asking questions that cut too deep to say out loud. Is there something broken in me? Do I even know who I am without people's approval? Would anyone still love me if I finally said no? You tell yourself, next time I'll speak up. But next time comes, and you feel that same electric fear coil around your voice. You don't speak, you don't push back, you just let it happen again. Why? Why do you keep letting people walk all over you? Is it fear of rejection, fear of abandonment, or maybe a deeper, older fear? The fear that your worth is conditional, that you have to earn your right to exist by being useful, agreeable, pleasant, even if it means betraying yourself. Where did you learn this? Who taught you that love must be bought, that boundaries are rude, that being chosen is more important than being whole? Can you even remember the first time you decided that your needs were negotiable? Was it a parent whose love came with strings? A teacher who praised your obedience? A friend who only liked you when you were agreeable? Whatever the origin, the outcome is always the same. You become a person people admire, but don't truly know. You become a person who helps everyone, except yourself. You become a person who gets invited everywhere, but feels utterly alone because self-abandonment wears a mask of kindness, but it's built on fear, and fear makes you small. So small, in fact, that you start mistaking being walked on for being valued. But what if I told you the moment you stop being available to everyone is the moment you become visible to yourself? That people walking all over you isn't about their lack of respect, it's about your lack of boundaries. That self-respect begins not with a loud rebellion, but with one quiet decision. I will not disappear in order to be loved. Because if love requires your erasure, it's not love, it's control. And if peace costs your dignity, it's not peace, it's imprisonment. So here's the real question. What are you so afraid will happen if you finally stand your ground? And even deeper than that, what are you so afraid you'll discover about yourself if you stop bending? Pause there, feel that tension, because that right there is the doorway to everything you've been running from. And beyond that doorway, we begin. Let's step into the darkness beneath your silence, because it's not just politeness, not just kindness, not just being the bigger person. It's something deeper, older, harder to name. To understand why you keep letting people walk all over you, you have to look beyond behavior into belief. Not what you say you believe, but what your body believes in the silence between words. You see, your nervous system doesn't lie, and your nervous system remembers everything, especially the pain you had to pretend didn't hurt. So let's go back, not just years, not just to your childhood, but to the psychological contracts you signed without even knowing they existed. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." So what unconscious belief is directing yours? At the core, it sounds like this: if I disappoint others, I will be punished emotionally, or worse, abandoned. This is the hidden program. This is why you nod when you want to shake your head, why you agree to things that make you feel sick, why you hand people a knife and then apologize when they cut you with it. It's not because you're weak. It's because you learned that your needs are dangerous, that your no is an act of rebellion, that your anger is unellowed, so instead of feeling it, you buried it, and in its place you built an identity, the helper, the peacemaker, the one everyone can count on, a beautiful role, until you realize you're just a character in everyone else's story, and your own voice is nowhere to be found in the script. But where did this begin? In families where love is conditional, children quickly learn being good means being quiet. Being easy to love means not being a burden, and being accepted means not being yourself. Psychologist Gobamate explains this brilliantly. He says, the child has two basic needs, attachment and authenticity. When authenticity threatens attachment, the child will always choose attachment. In other words, if being real puts love at risk, you will sacrifice your truth to survive, and you did, over and over, until self-erasure became a habit, and then a virtue. This is where the seed was planted, and society watered it, because let's be honest, we reward people-pleasing. We call it professionalism, maturity, emotional intelligence. We praise women who are selfless. We promote employees who never say no. We admire people who are low maintenance. And slowly, invisibility becomes virtue, and boundaries become threats. You start to believe, if I say no, I'll be replaced. If I speak up, I'll be rejected. If I protect my peace, I'll be seen as selfish. So you contort, you suppress, you give and give and give, until giving feels like breathing, and self-protection feels like betrayal. Nietzsche said, he who despises himself still respects himself as one who despises. Think about that. There is still a twisted pride in your self-neglect, because it gives you a sense of moral superiority. You tell yourself, I'm strong enough to handle the discomfort. I'm patient, they just don't understand yet. I'll speak up someday, but someday never comes, because the real discomfort isn't in being used, it's in being seen. Seen as someone who has needs, seen as someone who can say no, seen as someone with limits, and that's terrifying. because the moment you show your edges, someone might walk away, so instead you hide behind softness. You wear humility like armor. You weaponize empathy against yourself. You call it loyalty, even when it's slavery. And worst of all, you confuse silence for strength. But silence, when it's born from fear, is not strength. It's submission, and fear, left unexamined, becomes a life strategy. That's how you end up in relationship after relationship, job after job, situation after situation, where your peace is always on the chopping block. Not because people are evil, but because you trained them not to see you, and deep down, you resent them for it. But here's the hard truth. No. One can walk all over you unless you lie down first. So the real question isn't just, why do people treat me this way? It's, why do I keep offering myself up to be treated this way? And that answer lives in your beliefs. In the belief that your value depends on your usefulness. That your safety depends on your compliance. That love must be earned through endurance, but that belief isn't yours. It was installed by culture, by family, by pain, and it can be uninstalled, but not until you see it clearly. Not until you stop justifying it with phrases like, "That's just how I am. I don't like conflict. It's not worth the argument." Because every time you say those words, you avoid the real conflict, the one inside you, between your conditioned self and your true self. So ask yourself, who would you be if you believed, truly believed, that your boundaries weren't a threat, but a birthright? Would you still tolerate the silence after you say no? Would you still chase the approval of people who drain you? Would you still call it love when it feels like erasure? Or would you rise quietly, finally, into someone who no longer explains themselves because they no longer need permission to exist? That shift, that confrontation with your old programming, that's the beginning of power. And in the next chapter, we'll explore what happens when you don't confront it, because the longer you ignore the root, the more your life bears its bitter fruit. You think you're keeping the peace, but what you're really doing is waging war on yourself in slow motion, because every time you silence that whisper inside the one that says, "This doesn't feel right," a small part of you disappears, and at first, it's quiet, barely noticeable, like a room, growing darker by single light bulbs flickering out. You still smile, you still function, you still meet everyone's expectations, but inside, you feel hollow. This is the unseen cost of being walked on. You don't just lose respect, you lose yourself. And the tragedy, you won't even realize it until the damage is done. Let's map out what this slow erosion really looks like. You say yes when you mean no. You accept apologies that never come. You make excuses for mistreatment. You call it understanding. You call it empathy. You call it maturity. But your body knows better. You feel it in the pit of your stomach, tightening when you agree to things you don't want. You feel it in the lump in your throat. When you stop yourself from speaking the truth, you feel it in the exhaustion that no sleep can fix. Because living without boundaries is spiritual burnout. But instead of listening to these signals, you numb them. You distract yourself with productivity. You pour your pain into caretaking. You convince yourself you're just tired, that it's just a rough season, that it'll pass. But it doesn't, because the problem isn't the world. It's the rulebook you're using to navigate. A TA rulebook that says, being liked is more important than being respected. Keeping others comfortable is more important than honoring your discomfort. Being selfless means being boundaryless. And so, you keep shrinking, until one day you look in the mirror and think, I don't even know who I am anymore. This is not just emotional, it's neurological. When you repeatedly suppress your needs to maintain harmony, your brain rewires itself for people-pleasing as a survival response. Your prefrontal cortex, responsible for rational decision-making, takes a back seat to the amygdala. Your fear center, you become hyper-tuned to the moods and needs of others. You develop what psychologists call fawn response, a trauma response where you appease to avoid conflict. And over time, this becomes your default. You stop asking, what do I want? You start asking, what do they want from me? Not consciously, but habitually. You build a life around making sure others are okay, even if it means you are not. And here's the most painful part. The people around you start to expect it, because you've trained them to. You think you're being generous, but to them, it's normal, expected, entitled. You say yes to every last-minute favor. You forgive betrayal without real accountability. You let people vent to you for hours, but never feel safe enough to speak your own pain. And over time, they stop asking how you feel. Not because they're cruel, but because you've convinced them you don't need anything. You've become too easy to use, and too hard to truly know. Because what is a person without limits, without preferences, without needs? A mirror, a sponge, a shadow. And the longer you stay in that shadow, the more resentment builds. You start to feel invisible, unappreciated, unseen. But here's the paradox. You're not being overlooked because people are blind. You're being overlooked because you've made yourself disappear. There are deeper costs to career burnout. Friendships that drain instead of energize. Romantic relationships where love feels like labor. And spiritually, you become disconnected from your own soul, because your soul is not here to be agreeable. It's not here to be convenient. It's here to express, to create, to stand, to love without self-erasure. But the longer you silence it, the more anxious, irritable, and numb you become, until one day the breakdown comes. Sometimes it's a quiet collapse, sitting in your car, staring into nothing, wondering, how did I become this version of me? Other times, it's an explosive rage, a sudden outburst that shocks everyone because you've spent your whole life being so calm. But it's not really anger at others, it's grief. Grief for all the times you betrayed yourself for. Acceptance. Grief for all the versions of you that had to die to keep the peace. Grief for all the unspoken truths that calcified into silence. Philosopher Kierkegaard once said, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. Let that sink in, not poverty, not rejection, not even loneliness, but the despair of self-abandonment. And when you let people walk all over you, you are the one handing them the map to do it. Not because you want to be hurt, but because, on some level, you believe it's safer to disappear than to be fully seen and possibly rejected. But this isn't safety. It's a slow suicide of the self. And the longer you stay in this pattern, the more your life becomes a performance where applause replaces authenticity. But you don't need more applause. You need your voice back, and to reclaim it, you have to do something terrifying. You have to rebel against everything that made you believe that love must be earned through suffering in the next chapter. We begin that rebellion, the quiet, holy uprising that begins the moment you stop living to be liked and start living to be real. The moment of rebellion doesn't look like war. It looks like a whisper, a tiny flicker of defiance in a soul that has been too quiet for. too long, it begins not with a scream, but with a sentence like, "Actually, I don't agree, I can't make it, that hurt me." And when you first say it, your voice shakes, not because you're weak, but because it's the first time your soul has spoken after years of silence. This is the beginning of the revolution, to stop letting people walk all over you. You must first realize this. You are not obligated to be understood. You've been conditioned to believe that if you just explain yourself well enough, if you're kind enough, clear enough, selfless enough, people will treat you with respect. But that's not how it works. Some people misunderstand you on purpose, because if they understood you, they'd have to take accountability. They'd have to change. They'd have to stop using your silence as a shield for their entitlement. And so, they pretend not to get it. They gaslight, they guilt trip. They call you too sensitive or difficult. They turn your boundaries into accusations. But this is their defense mechanism, not your problem to fix. Your job isn't to be digestible. Your job is to be whole. This means you must unlearn the false virtues that kept you trapped. Selflessness. No, that's what they called it when you had no boundaries. Kindness. No, that was code for suppressing your needs. Maturity. No, that was the costume you wore when you swallowed rage and called it. Grace. Rebellion means reclaiming your definitions. It means you stop calling silence peace. You stop calling people-pleasing love. You stop calling self-abandonment humility, and you start calling things by their real names. But rebellion isn't just internal, it's behavioral, and it will feel unnatural at first, like walking barefoot on gravel. You'll feel guilt for saying no. You'll feel shame for disappointing others. You'll feel fear when your truth makes people uncomfortable. But that discomfort, it's not a sign you're doing something wrong. It's proof you're unlearning a lifetime of conditioning. Here's the paradox. Self-respect often feels like selfishness at first, not because it is, but because you were taught to make your needs microscopic. So when you start asserting them, they seem enormous. But they're not. They're just finally visible. You must also be ready for the loss. Because when you rise, some people will fall away. Not everyone who loved the version of you that had no boundaries will love the version that does. Some will leave. Others will lash out. Some will try to guilt you into reverting, calling you changed, cold, not like you used to be. And they'll be right. You're not who you used to be, because who you used to be was surviving. This version of you is becoming, and becoming always costs something. Let it, because the people who truly love you, the ones meant to walk with you, not over you, will adjust. They'll respect the new terms. They'll meet the real you, and stay. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche once said, "The individual has always had to struggle to keep from being overwhelmed by the tribe." This is your struggle, not against people, but against the inner voice that says, "Don't make things harder. Keep them happy. Be agreeable." But what if you don't? What if the cost of someone else's comfort is your dignity? Is it still worth it? That's the rebellion, refusing to be a footnote in your own story. And here's a secret most people won't tell you. You don't have to fight to be respected. You just have to stop participating in your own diminishment. You don't have to convince people to value you. You just have to stop over-delivering to those who don't. You don't have to earn your place. You just have to occupy it with presence, with boundary, with voice. And when people try to walk all over you, you don't have to scream. You don't have to rage. You don't even have to explain. You simply stand still and say, no, and then you let the silence do the rest. Because sometimes the most radical thing you can do is nothing. No pleasing, no performing, no negotiating. Just stillness, just the truth, just the quiet power of someone who has finally remembered they deserve to take up space. In the final section, we will go deeper into the ultimate truth behind this rebellion and why your self-respect is not just a choice, but a sacred act of becoming. Imagine a version of yourself, not stronger, not louder, not more aggressive, but quieter, still unmoved. A version of you that no longer negotiates your worth. A version of you that doesn't shrink when someone disapproves, that doesn't scramble to fix things that aren't yours to fix, that doesn't overextend, over-apologize, or over-explain, not because you've become numb, but because you've finally become whole. This is the ultimate truth. People can only walk all over you if you lie down first, and you've been lying down for years. You've done it out of love, out of fear, out of confusion, out of hope that if you just gave a little more, bent a little further, stayed a little quieter, someone would finally choose you. But here's what they never told you. Every time you give away yourself to be liked, you teach the world how to treat you, and what you tolerate multiplies. But self-respect is not a performance. It's not about becoming tough or untouchable. It's not about arrogance, control, or ego. It's about alignment. It's when your actions match your truth, when your yes is honest, when your no is clean, when your silence isn't a prison, but a statement. Self-respect is the moment you stop abandoning yourself in the name of harmony. It's the moment you say, if respecting myself costs me your approval, I'll learn to live without it. Because what's the point of being loved if it requires the death of your dignity? Philosophers and mystics throughout history have pointed to this exact paradox. You search for love by becoming smaller, but true love only finds you when you become real. Carl Jung called this process individuation, the integration of the shadow, the reclamation of what you've hidden, the unification of your soul. It's not about being nice. It's not about being accepted. It's about becoming complete. You stop letting people walk all over you. The day you stop needing them to approve of your walk, that's when the war ends. Here's something strange. When you stop trying to be liked by everyone, the right people start gravitating toward you, because confidence isn't about charisma. It's about congruence. When your energy no longer leaks from insecurity, when your words and actions align, when your presence doesn't beg to be seen, you become magnetic, not because you're loud, not because you're impressive, but because you're real. And in a world full of masks, realness is rare. Realness is irresistible. But there will be moments, even after your rebellion, when you're tempted to go back. You'll hear that old voice whisper, maybe I should have explained myself better. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe they're right about me. In those moments, you must remember, every time you over-explain yourself, you abandon the part of you that already knows what's true, knows what's enough, knows what's sacred. And that voice, the one that lives underneath the noise, that's your compass now. It doesn't speak in justifications. It doesn't argue. It simply says, this is who I am, and this is where I stand. So let the world misunderstand you. Let them project. Let them invent stories about your intentions. You don't owe them a smoother version of your truth. You don't owe anyone the performance of palatability. You owe yourself one thing and one thing only: loyalty to your own soul, the ultimate truth. You've been powerful all along. You just handed your power to people who never knew how to hold it. But now you remember. You remember what it feels like to take up space, to walk upright in your own life, to be the kind of person who can say no without guilt and yes without fear. You remember what it feels like to disappoint others and survive, to set boundaries and breathe deeper, to be misunderstood and still feel whole. This is self-respect, and once you've tasted it, even for a moment, you can never go back. So the next time someone tries to walk all over you, pause, look at them, feel the old impulse, the urge to shrink, to smooth things over, to explain. Then feel something deeper rise up in you, steadiness, a quiet strength that says, not anymore. You don't need to fight. You don't need to justify. You don't need to plead. You just need to stand, and when you do, the ground will shift beneath you, not because the world changed, but because you did. Why do I keep letting people walk all over me? You asked yourself this question for years, and now, finally, you have your answer, because you forgot who you were, and now you remember.